I want to thank all of our sponsors that make this possible. Our lead sponsors, Hunger Mountain Co-op and 802 Coffee. So please help me welcome. Also, big thanks to our other sponsors, Edward Jones Office of Keith LaCroix, Onion River Outdoors, Capital Copy, Concept 2, Washington Electric Co-op, Union Mutual, and Northfield Savings Bank. We have some hearing assist devices for anybody that finds it a little hard to hear tonight out in the lobby, and we can show you how those work. If you decide that you need one, just go grab one and turn it on and throw it over your ear, and that will help things out. And we have a couple more Naturalist Journeys presentations coming up. Next week, we're taking the week off, but following that, we have the Bees of Vermont with biologist Spencer Hardy, and after that, the History of North Branch Nature Center with landscape historian Samantha Ford. So come back in March and join us for those. So tonight we have a great program by Kai and Lisa. We'll hold questions until the end. We'll have a big long Q&A session after the presentation. We'll stay here as long as folks want to do Q&As. So if you don't mind holding questions until the end. And I am so excited that we have right in our midst here in the Mad River Valley 2 preeminent Yellowstone biologists who have been studying moose and wolves there at Isle Royale for more than a decade now. And so without further ado, please help me welcome Kai and Lisa.
Hello everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight. We're excited to share our experiences working with the Isle Royale Wolf and Moose study. There's a lot to tell about this study, so tonight we'll be just scratching the surface, but we'd like to give you a good summary of what goes on with the study, share some findings, and also explain and show what it's like working on a remote island in the middle of the winter. We'd be out there right now. Typically we're out there this time every year, but we had some personal things we had to take care of this winter, so we had to take the winter off. And like Sean said, we'll take questions at the end of the talk.
Oops. Sorry.
Isle Royale is a remote island wilderness located in the northwest corner of Lake Superior. It sits 15 miles off the shore, right where Minnesota meets Thunder Bay. The closest population centers are Thunder Bay, Ontario, and Grand Marais, Minnesota. However, Isle Royale is part of the state of Michigan. Isle Royale is long and skinny. It is 45 miles long and 9 miles at the widest point. The total area is 210 square miles. It has 50 inland lakes, and it's surrounded by 450 tiny little islands. It has a unique geology with long parallel ridges that run the length of the island. In between these ridges are beaver ponds, thick white cedar and black spruce swamps, some of these lakes, and ancient beaver meadows. The island and the ridges were formed when volcanic layers of rock were thrust up by plate movement, tectonic plate movement, and consequently, actually, how many people have been to Isle Royale? We have one person? All right, that's awesome. So she can relate to this if you've hiked around. Consequently, the north shore and the north sides of the ridges themselves are really steep and cliffy, where the south side, they taper gradually into the lake over here. Glaciers further shaped the island. When the glaciers came down, they scoured the soil off the eastern end of the island and piled glacial till on the western end. Consequently, on the eastern end where there's not much soil, it's predominantly balsam fir and white spruce forest. And on the western end, it's more hardwood forest, a lot of sugar maple and yellow birch like we see here. The middle of the island burned in 1936 and now exists as paper birch and aspen forest. Historically, Isle Royale was an important destination for Native Americans and early European settlers who came there to hunt, fish, trap, and mine for copper. Prehistoric evidence confirms that Native Americans have been mining copper on the island for over 4,000 years. Later on in the mid to late 1800s, more Europeans came and they set up commercial fisheries, logging camps, and mining operations. However, these were short-lived as the island was designated a national wilderness area in 1931. In 1940, the island was designated as a national park. And today, the park is a wilderness destination for kayakers and canoers, backpackers and hikers, and fishermen. The island is open 6.5 months of the year. It's not open in the winter. It's open from April 16th to October 31st. It is one of our least visited national parks, but one of our most revisited national parks. People love to go back to Isle Royale. And the only way to get out there right now is either by float plane or by ferry. Isle Royale supports only 19 species of animals compared to 40 species on the mainland, which is only 15 miles away. Notably absent are white-tailed deer, bears, bobcats, fisher cats, porcupines, skunks, raccoons, and even smaller mammals, voles, moles, and shrews. So there's very few mammals on the island. Some of the more conspicuous and abundant mammals on the island include the beaver, which is an important summer food for wolves, river otters, which we'll tell you about. We have a little funny river otter story for you later on. Red squirrels, snowshoe hares, red fox, like this one scavenging on this moose carcass, and of course the two largest mammals on the island, the gray wolf and the moose. And you'll see the moose has snow in its muzzle because it eats snow in the wintertime to acquire water. Wolves colonized Isle Royale in the late 1940s by crossing the 15 miles of ice from the mainland to the island. Here we see Lake Superior, Isle Royale here. Down below is Isle Royale, almost totally frozen over, and these little dash marks are where corridors where wolves would come over. A lot of times the lake isn't totally frozen over, but this little part tends to be from time to time. This is a picture we took one year from the island. Isle Royale is in the foreground, and the Ontario shore is in the distance. The ice goes all the way across. Historically, 8 out of 10 years, this ice bridge would form from Isle Royale to the mainland. But now with global warming trends, it's only forming 2 out of every 10. So there's less opportunity for animals to move back and forth from the mainland to the island. Moose colonized Isle Royale in the early 1900s by swimming. Moose are strong swimmers. They're known to swim great distances, and because they have a relatively small surface area to volume ratio, they aren't susceptible to hypothermia in the cold Lake Superior waters. A smaller animal like the deer, even though it's a good swimmer, wouldn't be able to swim all the way out there because it has smaller mass. But the moose probably swam there. Some believe that moose walked to the island. 15 miles of ice. Have you seen a deer or a moose on the ice? The hooves are so rigid that they act like skates, and sometimes they can't even stand. If it's glare ice, they'll just splay out. So pilot Donnie Glazer was flying around one day and saw these two moose on the ice. He landed nearby to investigate. He came over and he saw that they were out on the ice in these little patches of snow. He tried to coax them off the ice to the island. They wanted no part of it. They just stayed there. So he left. He came back 24 hours later, and indeed the moose had made it to the island, but it was only after snow blanketed the ice that they were willing to move from there. Now to the moose study. The Isle Royale moose study is completed through Michigan Tech, and it runs all year long, but we're here to tell you about the winter component, and it's called Winter Study. And Winter Study is in its 66th year this year. It's the longest ongoing large mammal predator-prey study in the world. So we feel very fortunate to be a part of that. and it takes place from mid-January till early March, about 7 or 7.5 weeks every winter. Researchers are out on this island. Before we get into the details of the study, we want to share some sounds and video to give you a feel for what it's like being out here in the winter. Lisa onto the ice to start our day. Hi, Lisa. It's a beautiful day. There's camp. The gasoline's out in front because they're going to start capturing moose tomorrow, and that's to refuel the spotter plane. And as we look around, there's our ice hole. The moose antler marking the spot. That's over towards the lighthouse. Beautiful sunrise this morning. The ice is still talking to us. You can hear it groaning a little bit. And then we're headed down to Mosky Basin. We're going to cover about 11 or 12 miles today. And there's Lisa. We have fresh tracks today. It's going to be beautiful. The study was started in 1958 by Wildlife Conservation University, and his student at that time was David Meach. And some of you may know David Meach is one of the world's leading experts in wolf ecology, and that was him his first years as a student. Rolf Peterson, on the left, started working with Alan in 1970, also as a student. And then in 1976, he started leading the study when he started working for Michigan Tech University in Houghton, Michigan. The other two people are Sarah Hoy and John Vucetich, who are also Michigan Tech professors and who co-lead the study with Rolf. Lisa and I started with the study in 2011 as a ground crew. We're on the ground collecting field data. In the middle here is our good friend and mentor, Rolf Peterson. We get to the island in one of two ways. If we're flying from mainland Minnesota, we fly over in a Forest Service de Havilland Beaver equipped with skis so it can land on the frozen harbor. Sometimes we fly from Thunder Bay, Ontario with a private contractor in a Bell 412 helicopter. Flying in a helicopter is more efficient than flying in a plane because it's less weather dependent compared to the Beavers. You can carry more people and gear in a helicopter, and they can drop us off right at the front door of the bunkhouse, so we don't have to shuttle people, food, and gear a half a mile up from the harbor. When we get to the island, two small two-person planes are used for all the wildlife surveys and to shuttle people and gear around the island. And here Lisa's in this plane. The guy came back, Don Murray, you'll hear about him in a bit. He loaded up our gear, we got our skis strapped to the ski struts, and they're taking us to an outpost camp on the other end of the island. There's been 3 pilots that have been working for the project since its inception in 1958, the 3 Dons. On the left is Don Murray. He's a Minnesota conservation officer, and he's the current pilot. He's also the grandson of Don Murray on the right, who started flying the project in 1958, and he flew for 22 years. Don Glazer is an Alaskan bush pilot, and he had flown for 37 years with the project. A quick plane story for you now. So this is a picture from the 70s with Don Murray, the grandfather, and his plane. It's an Aranca Champion, is the model of the plane, and it's referred to as the Champ. Here's Rolf Peterson, as a young fella also. Don Murray retired. He sold his plane in 1984. Years later, in 2001, his grandson, Don, who's the current pilot, was driving around Minnesota and saw this plane derelict in the field, somebody's field, and he bought it back, this plane, all those years later. He restored it to the original condition and now is proudly flying his grandfather's plane. I get choky all the time when I talk about that. But he flies his grandfather's plane in the study. We work out of 2 locations on the island. On the west end, we're here at Wendigo on Washington Harbor, and this is where the primary research base is. And we also work 30 miles to the east out of Daisy Farm Campground. We'll be staying in a little ranger cabin there. And we're going to see who would recognize this sign. Maybe you would recognize it. Did you go to Wendigo when you were out there in 1970?
Not that far. We were starting in Rock Harbor.
Okay.
Other end of the
Other
island.
end of the island. This is where the Voyager 2, one of the ferries brings people over and drops them off at the west end of the island.
In the summer.
In the summer, the ferry is doing that. On the west end of the island, we stay in a bunkhouse. This building is used to house summer employees. In the wintertime, we have wood heat in here. We have a generator for lights at night. We have propane stove. We draw water out of a hole in the ice in the harbor. And then we bathe in a wood-fired sauna. This is the cabin that we stay in when we're in the east end of the island at the Daisy Farm Campground. The water out in front is a body of water called Mosky Basin. This is the inside of the cabin. It's 12 by 24. It has propane heat, propane lights, and propane cooking. There's no phone, there's no electricity, there's no internet. We love it out there. It's the best weeks of our year doing our work out here in Daisy Farm Cabin. We chop our hole in the ice using a tool called an ice spud. It's like a digging bar, but it has a chisel end on it. And we're going to tell you a story about these ice holes here in a second.
Here is Kai digging for our water. Here at Daisy Farm, we just arrived here this afternoon, turned on the propane, so now we have heat. And here's Kai.
We're already 14 inches down.
Holy cow.
Candy cool.
Very close-up view of the... Wow, well, I guess we're not going through the ice when we ski across it, huh?
So the first year we were out there, we got the ice spud out. We dug our first hole. It was 17 inches of ice. The next day we're coming back from the field and we see something odd around the ice hole. We got closer. There's a bunch of fish scales, a bunch of fish parts, blood, all kinds of slimy poop all around our hole. The otters had seen the hole from underneath the ice and came up through it and defiled our ice hole. So we had to go get the ice spud, dig another hole. Well, a few days later, we were leaving to go out the door of the cabin, and we look out the window and we see 4 wolves walking from left to right on the ice. It's a travel corridor out in front of this cabin, so if you stay there long enough, you're going to see wolves going past. And 3 of the wolves went by, and the 4th one was a big wolf. It was probably a big male. It stopped in its tracks. Lisa and I are looking out the window. We're probably 50 yards away, and we have the feeling that it's looking right at us. We're like, how does it even know we're in here? It's a dark space. So this wolf appears to be looking straight at us, walks up to our ice hole, and almost defiantly, while he's looking at us, lifts its leg and pees on our ice hole. So that was the second ice hole, so we got out the ice spud, chipped another one, and then we learned from those experiences. We covered the ice hole with a garbage can lid, buried it in snow, and then marked it with a moose antler. We haven't had any problems since. Oh, and there's no plumbing out there, as you can imagine, but there is an outhouse with a beautiful view. So because it gets so cold out there, we keep the toilet seat inside until we need it. We do all our work on backcountry telemark skis, and we do that because it's the most efficient way to travel around the island. Before we were out there, people were doing all this work on snowshoes. I can't even imagine trying to cover ground on snowshoes. But we collect field data on wolves, moose, and fir trees. And the data we collect are used for a bunch of analyses that we'll tell you about in a little bit. We average about 8 miles a day when we're out on our skis. While there are a lot of objectives to every study, the primary objectives of the Isle Royale study is to document the change in wolf and moose populations over time, to understand predator-prey dynamics of the wolf-moose system, and to understand how the wolves and moose affect the island ecosystem. To document change in wolf and moose numbers, aerial survey and account from the air is done for both the wolf and moose populations each year. That's Don Murray flying the plane up there. Rolf Peterson, John Vucetich, or Sarah Hoy will join him in the back seat when they're doing those surveys. With the wolf surveys, every single wolf is counted. A complete count of all the individual wolves is done each year. And that can be done because the wolves are visible and they're easy to see from the air in the plane. They leave tracks, so they're easy to follow. Most of them travel in packs, and then we're out there for 7.5 hours, or 7.5 weeks, so you see them frequently. So they can get a very accurate number down to the wolf.
You see them frequently from the air.
We see them frequently from the air. We don't see them frequently from the ground. Moose are counted on 91 plots that are representative of the habitat on the island, and then those counts are extrapolated over the rest of the island. This is a rare picture of a congregation of 10 moose in an area on the western side of the island in February of 2018, where young balsam firs, their primary winter food, these little firs had escaped herbivory for a number of years, and now these moose just found it, and I don't think there's going to be much forage left on these little trees by the time they're done. But it's very unusual to see that many moose in one shot from the plane. When researchers first started studying this predator-prey system, they thought on Isle Royale, they thought it would be fairly simple. They were thinking it would be something similar to the traditional snowshoe and the lynx study, when the number of the snowshoe hare and the lynx. When the number of hares go up, the number of lynx go up. When the number of hares go down, the number of lynx go down, and so on. And they also thought it would be simple because there was only one large predator and one large prey on an isolated island. But that is not what they observed. Instead, in over 60 years of study, researchers have found that the dynamics between wolves and moose were not predictable at all, but instead shaped by unanticipated, unexpected, and even unimaginable events. So we're going to tell you about some of these events, but I'm going to review this figure with you leading up to that. So this shows the change in wolf and moose population numbers from 1959 to 2015.
19.
Excuse me?
2019.
Or 2019, excuse me. Open circles represent wolf counts. So this right here is how the wolf numbers change over time from 1959 to 2019. And the open circles correspond to the numbers on the left side of this graph, wolf abundance over here. So for example, this open dot represents a population of 20 wolves in the year 1963. Moose are represented by solid dots. This is the moose population change over the years, and it corresponds to these numbers on the right side, moose abundance over here. An example here is this dot represents about 1,500 moose in the year 2018.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, so the first event happened in 1980. The wolf population had risen from 20 to 50 wolves. In 1980, there were 50 wolves, the highest that's ever been on the island. In 2 years, that number crashed to 14. It was found that a dog from the mainland was infected with canine parvovirus, brought it to the island. Dogs aren't allowed on the island, and the disease was introduced into the population. It killed a lot of adults, wolves, and almost all the pups in these next couple of years, and the population just crashed. Concurrent to that, and then over the next 2 decades, decade and a half, moose numbers went through the roof. And in 1996, they were approaching 2,500. And so they were eating all the island vegetation, including the food, the fur that they relied on for their winter browse. So in 1996, you can imagine what was going to happen. A severe winter, a big infestation of moose ticks, and a lack of food all conspired against the moose population. In 1996 was one of the worst winters in the history, with deep snow, extremely cold temperatures, and snow lasting all the way into the spring, well into the spring, snowpack. Well, that one winter, 1,500 moose died. 60% of the population died, and most of them from starving. And this is an example of an emaciated moose in the spring. You can see the bony hips and the bony spine. There's no snow on the ground. This moose can find food, but it's lost so much of its energy reserves that it probably won't replenish them, and it likely will die, as was the fate of those 1,500 moose in 1996. The next event happened in 1997 when a wolf from the mainland crossed the ice bridge to the island. He was known as the Old Gray Guy, and he became one of the most successful breeders on Isle Royal. In 1998, there were only 13 wolves, and by the time he was done his thing, there were 30 wolves in 2006. This is a picture of him here in the middle. He's larger and lighter in color than the rest of the wolves. He was an alpha male in a pack for 8 years. He bred for 6 of them. He bred one of the native females, and then he bred one of his daughters. He died in 2006. DNA analysis from scats since then have confirmed that he sired 34 offspring. However, many were the result of inbreeding, and none of them successfully bred or had offspring. The population was primed to collapse. I mean, it helped for a little bit, but it wasn't persistent, and that's what happened. The population of wolves collapsed after that. In 2006, there were 30 wolves living in 3 packs. In 2011, there were only 16 wolves left in the population. There was only 2 females. That same year, in 2011 or 2012, the alpha male from the Chippewa Harbor pack and 2 other wolves accidentally fell in one of those old mine shafts, and they drowned. Oh. By 2016, there was only 2 wolves left on the island. So chance events like those wolves falling in the island, falling into the mine, and the negative effects of inbreeding for all those years had these wolves on the verge of extinction. This next slide shows the inbred pair. Oh, go back 1 second, Lisa. And the other thing about this is at low wolf population way down here, look what the moose population is doing. It's growing rapidly, and it's up over 2,000 moose as of 2018. This is a picture of the last remaining wolves on the island. They're a pair. They're father, daughter, and they're also half siblings, and they were born from the same mother. Think about that. They did have one offspring, and it was we've seen pictures of it. It looks like this hunched. It would walk, and it was all hunched. It was grotesque, and it didn't last the first winter. It died. So these wolves would never probably produce again. But they did persist on the island alone till 2018. In 2018, fearing that those two wolves would never produce offspring and that the rising moose numbers were going to decimate the island vegetation, the National Park Service authorized the introduction of wolves back to the island to, number one, to give a genetic rescue to the wolf population, and also to rebalance the ecosystem, knowing that those moose are going to go crazy without the wolves. And so in 2018 in the fall, 4 wolves were captured in Minnesota and released on the island. And this is in September of 2018, and this is the first wolf released back into Isle Royale. It's a female wolf from Minnesota. Over the next 2 years, a total of 19 wolves were put back on the island. The 4 we talked about from Minnesota, there was 3 from a town called Wawa in Ontario, 8 wolves from Michipicoten Island, Ontario, and then 4 wolves from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan were reintroduced. The goal was to infuse the island with as much genetic diversity as possible to try to build back that genetic base for the population. So they took wolves from different areas from around Lake Superior. The wolves that were introduced were either trapped, like the Minnesota wolves were trapped, but and the Michigan wolves probably were, but most of the rest of them, the Ontario wolves, were captured with net guns that were shot from a helicopter. And then when they're on the ground, they're sedated. Once they're on the ground, then they're tagged with ear tags for visual identification and a GPS radio collar. A GPS radio collar transmits real-time location data to satellites, which can then be downloaded on a computer, that we can get on the computer and take those coordinates, download them into our handheld GPS unit, and go find them. Or if they're flying around, it's easier to find them with that. Most of the wolves were dropped off at the west end of the island because the native pair occupied a territory in the east end. This is a male wolf from Michipicoten Island being dropped off on Washington Harbor. Beaver Island, if you know any of the landmarks, is the island behind it there. This is a video created using GPS data from 11 wolves. You're going to see in March of 2019, 11 new wolves on the island. We're going to see that they're going to do a little exploring. You'll note that some travel a lot more than others. You're going to see others walking on water down here. That's the frozen Siskiwit Bay down there. So let's cut those little guys loose.
Let me see.
What's the time period?
Yeah, it is.
The month of March.
The month of March. And I don't know exactly how many days, so I guess I can't answer that accurately. This is an image from a remote camera from December of 2020, taking a picture of 9 wolves. Only 2 of them, like this one we see right here, has ear tags and radio collars, meaning that the other 7 were born on the island from that pair. This is the first evidence that the Isle Royale wolves formed packs and had offspring. As of March 2022, the Isle Royale Wolf Project estimated that 1,346 moose and 28 wolves live on the island. That was end of last March, so we'll see what they come up with today, this year. The study also looks at the effects that moose have on balsam fir. For those of you that can't tell, this is a moose eating a branch, that's a nostril, and there's an eyeball up there. You don't normally get a good look at a moose that close up. In a short amount of time, moose can devastate balsam fir. They can have a great negative effect on balsam fir. This typically occurs when wolf density is low, or wolf density is low and moose density is high. The other thing compounding this is that the mature cone-producing trees on the island are reaching old age and they're dying, and there's not a lot of new trees to replace them because the moose are eating them all. So there might be a lot less fir on the island in the future, which wouldn't support that big of a moose population. So that's why we put a lot of time into studying the effects of browsing on the fir. We quantify the amount of browse in the fir by taking measurements. Lisa's taken a measurement of the terminal stem of this fir sapling. We'll take the height and a whole bunch of other measurements. This is fir that is regenerating. It hasn't been browsed for a bunch of years. Believe it or not, these little trees could be 20 or 30 years old. If they're constantly eaten every year, they never grow. They just kind of get bushed out. So you'll see the whole bottom of these trees are all mangled and broomed and crooked, but all of a sudden there's 3 feet of new growth on the top. So this is a low moose density situation right here, as opposed to this, where every possible edible part has been eaten. Even these terminal stems, some of them are ½ inch in diameter. The moose are just chewing on wood. And this happens when moose density is high. Just to show you how damaging a moose can be to a fir tree, these are the same plot of firs in 2 different years. This is 1 year. You can see there's a lot of vegetation on here, even enough to hold some snow. That year later, there's not an edible twig on there. This next set of slides shows the same thing from 1 year to the next. Here we have a lot of new regrowth on these fir saplings here. This one's up here at 10 feet high. The next year we came back, the moose had snapped them all off because they want to get to that vegetation on the top, and they've taken every little bit of vegetation off of there. So you can imagine what would happen with 2,500 moose. You talked about the high line of the moose. The moose will eat every fir tree as high as it can reach. So that can have great negative effects on the island ecosystem. This is a slide that was made by our friend Kira Cassidy from the Yellowstone Wolf Project. We have found that saplings can actually defend themselves from moose by concentrating toxins in its new growth. So this moose had come walking in, and I don't know how it knew or if this was the case, but he dug around in the snow to eat the forage on the bottom, and he left the lush green stuff that you and I would eat on the top. And now he's over here checking out this next fir sapling, wondering where he should start eating it. Isn't it unbelievable that a little fir sapling can defend itself from a big moose? We can quantify how much energy a moose uses to detoxify its diet. So in order to eat that fir, it has to put energy into processing it and taking the toxins out so it can digest it. And we do this by analyzing urine chemicals. The way we collect urine is when it's frozen in the snow, and then we melt it down. We can also tell how healthy a moose is during the winter. We can track its health through the winter. We can tell when it's actually starting to metabolize its own muscle, when it starts to starve, by looking at these different chemicals in the urine as well. And we also collect fecal pellets, and we'll analyze the particles in the pellets for what species of plants are in there, and then we'll determine a diet composition for these pellets. You know, what proportion of which plants is that moose eating. And what we find is the moose with the most diverse diets are the healthiest moose.
Leah.
Oh, and our friend Leah Vucetich, also an Isle Royal professor, is the one that takes care of a lot of these analyses. At the same time wolves were being introduced to the island, moose were also being radio-collared. And so and most of them were female moose, with both wolves and moose collared, then we could determine what the impacts were of the reintroduced wolves on both the movements and behavior of the moose. And then we could also get a better idea on mortality factors of those radio-collared moose. How many of the moose are actually getting killed by wolves or dying from other means. Prior to 2019, we collected urine and pellet samples from random moose. But now with some radio-collared, we can follow these moose around and collect samples from them every year and get a thorough assessment of their health over time. This map shows the location of every radio-collared moose on the island last March. And each one of these little clusters of squares is a moose. And we're going to zoom in onto this one in this next slide and show you what we're looking at. We see a green and a red square right there. That's about all we see. We get closer. This is a female moose traveling over a 6-day period. The green is where this moose started from. The red is where she was when we downloaded the data. So her track from here to here goes something like this, right? And finally she ended up here. Well, we'll look at these points and we'll find out where there's clusters of points, 2 or 3 points that are closer to one another, and we'll know that that's where moose bed. Moose never stand around for very long. If they're browsing, they're moving all the time. The only time they're not moving is when they're bedded down. So we're going to go download the points from where these bedding sites are, download them into our handheld units, and we're going to go out, we're going to find those beds, we'll tell you why. Here's Lisa. She has found this bed under a big balsam fir tree, and they don't always bed in one place for very long, but when the snow's melted to the ground, you know they've been there for a while, or they reuse this. When the snow gets deep, the moose don't like to travel that far, so they'll stay in one area and they'll use the bed multiple times. Oftentimes we just see a bed, the animal uses it once and it's gone. We locate the beds because that's where we typically find the pellets and the urine near. Like most animals, before you go to bed, you go to the bathroom. When you get up, you go to the bathroom. And so oftentimes we'll find the pellets and urine in close proximity to the beds. If not, we follow the tracks of the animal until we do, and we follow the tracks backwards because we never want to disturb the study animal. When we do find the samples, we take about a fist-sized sample of frozen urine and about 20 pellets for all our analyses. Other findings. We conduct animal autopsies called necropsies on the carcasses of wolf-killed moose. This is the carcass of an old bull killed by the East Pack last winter on Muskie Basin. This is about 2 miles down the shore from where our cabin is. Two of the most important samples to take from a carcass are teeth and femur bones. And from the teeth, we can determine a definitive age from the analysis of cementum annuli. So every year, the jaw lays down a layer of cementum on the tooth root to anchor it into the jaw. So if you take that tooth and you section it either longitudinally or across, you can actually count those layers, those annuli, like we count grains on a tree, and we can get exact ages for these animals. The incisors are the best teeth to use, so that's what we typically go for. You can get ages out of molars, but it's not as accurate. We grab the femur because we want to look at bone marrow fat. The amount of bone marrow fat tells us how healthy the animal is. This marrow on the left side is packed full of fat. It has a consistency of hard peanut butter. That's a healthy animal that has that marrow. This one over here, this red gelatinous marrow, is depleted of fat. It doesn't have any fat reserves. The fat in the bone is some of the last fat to be depleted. So this animal is probably on the verge of starving. And what we find from necropsies on the island are that wolves kill primarily calf moose, or the old, the malnourished, or the injured, or the ones that just make a bad move. Wolves don't like to just go up and kill any animal. If you're a wolf and you're killing an animal with your face, you're not going to go up to the biggest moose in the park and try to take it down. However, if that moose is mired in deep snow or something like that, you may be opportunistic and go after it. But as a rule, they try not to get their face kicked in too much, and they'll go for the most vulnerable animals. We also look at arthritis on the island. We find that Isle Royal moose have more arthritis in their population than mainland moose. And here we're inspecting 2 hip bones. This is a socket where the femur sits, and this is a healthy socket. It has a hole in the middle where the tendon from the top of the femur actually attaches to the hip. This is an unhealthy moose. There's no hole in here. That hole has been filled in with arthritic bone. Recent, and I think it came out just in the last couple months, an article from the Isle Royal that shows that moose are actually culling older arthritic animals out of the population.
Okay.
So that concludes the summary of the study and the findings. Now we're going to tell you a story about some wolves in the East Pack. So last year, on February 7th, Lisa and I were at the Daisy Farm cabin. We left the cabin, skied across to the other side. We were skiing down the shore on the other side in the shade. The sun had just risen, so we were shaded by the trees on the side of the shoreline. We got to about this point here. We looked across the ice, and we saw this rock over there that we didn't notice before. So we got our binoculars out. We realized the rock had ears. It was a wolf laying in the snow. We started panning down across the shoreline, and we noticed a freshly killed moose. And then a little further down were 11 other wolves laying in the sun, big bellies after just feeding on the moose. We had stumbled in the entire East Pack. So we watched for about a couple hours. We were about 500 meters away. We were hidden behind this big white cedar. The wind was in our face. They couldn't smell us. They got up in a little while. They went back to feeding. There they're lined up shoulder to shoulder like cows at a trough. This wolf over here grabbed a little morsel of food, brought it off on the side, and he's nibbling away by himself. These 4 ravens are waiting for the wolves to leave so they can get back in to scavenge. Eventually, the wolves rallied. They got together, and they ended up laying back down. And we ended up skiing quietly back to the cabin and thinking to ourselves, we've seen a lot of wolves out in Yellowstone National Park because it's an open landscape. You can see wolves for miles away, Sean, as you would know. But it's rare to see a wolf on a thick vegetated island like that. So we were just thrilled that we had an opportunity to see these wolves up close, but it even gets better. So the next morning, our goal is to go back to the carcass site, provided those wolves leave, and collect DNA scat samples for DNA analysis. So we're out on the ice looking. We could see the pack a mile and a half, 2 miles up in the binoculars. They're sitting on this little point of land that juts out into the harbor near some trees. And we see them up there. We come back into the cabin. We're waiting. We go out later to check again. And I get out on the ice, and I'm thinking 2 miles away. I got my binoculars up, and I look, and there's this wolf walking down the shoreline about 400 meters away. And I just froze, thinking the wolf has to see me. It didn't. I snuck back into the cabin, and Lisa and I are sitting there, and here comes this wolf trotting right up to the cabin. And it stopped 70 feet from the corner of the cabin when it reached our ski tracks, and it started sniffing. And just like that wolf that peed on our water hole, this wolf turned, and I don't know how it knew where we were, but it was looking at us straight through the window. It didn't hang around long after that. It turned and trotted down the harbor. So later on, probably about noon by this time, we looked out and we could see the whole pack stretched out, all 12 animals, going to the southwest side of Mosky Basin. They went around the corner and they were out of sight. We figured they were gone for the day. We knew it was going to snow that night, so that was the time to go get the scat samples if we could. So we skied up to that area that they were bedded that morning and started looking for scats. You can see these are all wolf tracks, just pounded, and that was just since the night before. There's some wolf beds here, here, and here, and up in here. There was a few in the bushes in all this little grassy spot. They were like little nests. They were like a big bird made it in there. So we collected scats here, and we were going to move on to the carcass area, and we peeked through the trees and realized that there were some other wolves coming towards the carcass. And there were 3 wolves. One ended up being a really small wolf that we thought was a pup. You'll see a picture of it later. But they were just playing as they were running in. The one was dumping the other one in the snow. You can see here the big one has the little one by the tail. And they settled into feeding on the carcass again. So Lisa and I are like, we're not going to be able to get to that carcass today. So we thought we'd be a little more thorough searching the area we were. We picked up a few more scats, and I saw one out on the ice that was in view of the wolves. But I knew the wolves couldn't smell us. The wind was hard in our face. They were busy feeding. I'm like, I'm just going to run out there and get that thing. I'll be back in a second. Well, I go out onto the ice, and I'm kneeling down like this. I have my glove on. I'm picking the scat, and I look up, and those 3 wolves are looking at me. They're standing side to side looking at me, and I just froze. And all of a sudden, they started running at me, full speed. And I wasn't afraid, because I knew they were probably just curious. They didn't know if I was another wolf. They didn't know if I was a pack mate. They came running with excitement and curiosity and not menace. You could tell just in the way they were coming in. And all of a sudden, at 60 yards away, they just stopped. They're like, this is not a wolf. And they're trying to figure out what was going on. And this was the little pup.
Oops, sorry.
Oops. This was the little pup. And that one ended up turning around and going the other way. But the other 2 wanted to figure out what I was, so they circled around me. They wanted to get downwind so they could smell. Out in the woods with the deer, you see it happen all the time. If a deer sees you and you don't spook it, it's going to start working downwind to try to figure out what you were. So this is a picture that Lisa took from the shore of me out on the ice, and there's one of the wolves running past me. He's trying to get downwind to smell me, to see what I am. And what followed after that was 5 minutes of close encounters with these wolves at 50 yards. It was just amazing. And the 2 wolves were just running back and forth, right to left, directly downwind from me, just trying to figure out what I was. They weren't making a sound. They weren't barking. They weren't howling. It was just quiet and beautiful. And this is a video we have of them, and it's a little shaky because I'm on my hands and knees kind of holding this video at my chest, but it was amazing just experiencing this. They are beautiful. We went to hide behind this pile of snow, you'll see.
Okay.
And then they just quietly disappeared. The one went back to the far shore, looped around, and just quietly walked up the other shore. This one just silently went into the woods off to the left, and that was that. It was quite an experience that we'll never forget. It was wonderful. And part of that is, you don't want to affect the animal that you're studying. I felt bad that I was in that position anyhow to alter their behavior, but I just stayed in a non-threatening position and I just let the wolves figure things out. I didn't want to cause them more stress. So the future. It is difficult to predict the fate of wolves and moose of Isle Royale. Warming trends will reduce the frequency of ice bridges to the mainland, thereby decreasing the chance that new wolf genes will get to the island. The wolves will likely again suffer the consequences of genetic inbreeding. Drought conditions and wildfires are becoming more common. Spruce budworm, a defoliating insect, has been ravaging balsam firs for the past 4 years. This has created more tinder for wildfires and has decreased food for wintering moose. Some say the island's habitat will be unsuitable for moose in 50 to 100 years. The only way to know what will happen in the future is to keep observing. So with that, we just want to offer, if you guys are interested in any information about Isle Royale, this is the Isle Royale Project website. They have all the annual reports all the way back from 1958 there, and then all kinds of other resources. I don't know if we have any teachers in here, but they have some teaching resources in here as well. A book written by Rolf Peterson called Wolves of Isle Royale, A Broken Balance. We have a copy over here. Is a great book. It's well written. It gives you a good summary of the study. If you're going to read one book about Isle Royale, that would be the book. And then there's a neat film out there called Fortunate Wilderness by George Sort, if you haven't seen that yet. And that talks about the study itself, and there's some great insights in there by Rolf Peterson and John Vucetich as well. We thank you for coming. We enjoyed our talking to you, and so if you have any questions, we're happy to field them.
Go ahead. You.
Okay. I was wondering, when you guys are out there, do you see a lot of birds, like say crossbills, out there?
Not a lot, but we do see them. So we,
Okay.
yeah. So we have crossbills. We've seen
Pine
grosbeaks.
All the woodpeckers, pileated, hairy.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's possible
Downy.
that they contribute by dispersing their seeds to the regrowth of some of the bird trees?
Oh, I'm
Is
sure,
that-
possibly for sure. But it may not be enough to compete with the
Yeah.
the population of moose. But yes, for sure, I would imagine that they do that.
And it was interesting, we keep a bird list every year, and we talked about the spruce budworm, and the trees weren't producing a lot of cones. And 2 years ago, our bird count was 22 species, and last year was only 9. And we were missing a lot of those crossbills and grosbeaks. We saw 2 grosbeaks, 2 singles, and they weren't even up in the trees feeding on any cones. They were down picking around the island. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
yes.
I was so happy to hear that they decided to bring wolves back. There was a big discussion among biologists.
It was a big discussion.
And should they let nature take its course? And I was hoping, since mankind has ruined the climate, that we would try to compensate for that. So
I think that was a big reason why they did decide to, because it was an altered ecosystem because of what we've done to contribute to global warming. But yes, we're all happy. Who knows, it could happen again
they could.
sooner or later. Yes?
I was curious about the toxin that the balsam was putting out. How was it actually ultimately affecting the moose? I didn't glean it.
Oh, it doesn't harm them in a toxic kind of way, but they can't digest the forage until they neutralize whatever that chemical is. So they have to invest energy into doing that in their metabolic system in order to be able to digest that. So basically, they're getting less nutrients, less energy out of that food than they normally would, because they have to expend energy to make it so they can even eat it
Okay, so
or digest it.
another question on that then is, how can they determine if it's putting out the toxin? Can they determine that before they eat it? And if so, how do they do that?
Well, that's a good question. We don't know that, and we don't know specifically that big moose was going up to that tree, and whether they're sniffing it or what they do. What we see in the field is this lush young tree and has all kinds of new growth on it, and the moose coming in and pawing down into the bottom and eating this old gnarly stuff. So you can only imagine that those toxins must be in there. And they do the analysis. They know the toxins are in there. We're looking to try to find out, are the toxins in all the trees? Are they in the young trees or in the old trees? So a lot of the browse samples that we take are to look at those kind of things.
And it's definitely ongoing, so hopefully there'll be more research that's found.
So you mentioned a dog
Mm-hmm.
got on the island. Do they know how the dog got there?
I think it just came over in a boat. You know, there's a lot of people that go out there in their own boats for the day. They're fishing, they're doing this or that. It probably came out in a boat. You can't get a dog on one of the ferries at all. So it would have had to have been an informal
On a
visitor
private boat,
on a
yes.
private
And
boat.
so technically, there's no way to prevent that from happening again.
Technically not. Just hopefully people understand the repercussions. It's not allowed. And if they know why, maybe they'll be more careful.
Yeah.
In the back?
Yeah, so I'm curious about that it was an opportunistic introduction of both wolves and moose in the early 1900s. Is there then the argument of like not reintroducing new wolves would be that you're letting it take its course? Is there going to be a time period, obviously that will be revisited again, but do you think that will be a different answer the next time? Like you'll eventually just let them, the wolves and or the moose be extirpated from the island?
It'll be interesting because, like I had mentioned, they think that the island habitat, as things get warmer, it's going to get windier, it's going to be drier, there's going to be more fires, that the habitat isn't going to be suitable for moose possibly down the road. And so if there's not a lot of moose out there, it might not make sense like it did this time when there was 2,000 of them to bring wolves back. So I think what we're going to see are things going to change, and it may happen a lot faster than it had in the past. But it's interesting. Yes?
So what kind of impact does the hyper-tourism have on the island and the animals? I mean, do they end up having run-ins with them? I mean, I know you're not there during the summer, but you obviously see kind of a lot of it.
Yeah. Well, the biggest issue probably is with moose in the fall during the rut. Probably people have more encounters with negative encounters with moose that time of year, or if there's a cow with a calf. The wolves stay as far away from people as they can.
And it is really thick vegetation, so I think the wolves could potentially be nearby, but you wouldn't know it. And it doesn't seem, we're not out there in the summer, but from the researchers that we work with, it doesn't seem to have affected the wolves. They've bred, they've formed packs, they've moved around the island. So I don't think it's had an effect, but...
And the island is so thick that people rarely even get off the trails. You know that. I mean, to bushwhack in the island is just, not many people do it. So they're defined to the trails. The wolves know where all the people are, so that probably helps them, stay away.
And
Yes.
there's separate campgrounds too, and you're only allowed to camp in certain areas, so they do try to keep those controlled.
I have another quick question, and then in the wintertime when the food becomes scarce, do you find that the moose or the wolves try to cross back over to, the mainland?
It's happened twice in the recent past, and I don't know if I
Not
have
moose, just wolves.
or wolves have actually left the island. We actually were out there one year when 2 wolves came over from the mainland. This was earlier in the 2000 teens. There wasn't as many moose there. They came over from mainland Ontario. The spotter plane saw them on the island. They were there for maybe 2 days. They did around the island, and they went back to Ontario. And then another time, there was a wolf that was being persecuted by a pack of wolves. It got attacked numerous times. It finally left the ice. It got to the mainland, and it was found dead a couple days later. It was shot with a pellet gun, and this little pellet actually found its way between 2 ribs and killed that wolf. So it got all the way back, and that was its fate. And then there was another one of the Minnesota wolves, I think, that was put on there, one of those 4. When we were out there, they had radio signals from it flying in the plane out on the ice somewhere. They didn't know what was going on. And a couple days later, they get reports from the mainland that it's on the mainland, and it actually has done pretty well. It took up a territory west of Thunder Bay, and I don't know if it's still living, but yeah, so more wolves have left than have
We'd like
come to the
we'd like
island
more
lately.
to come on, but it seems that there are more that have gone off.
Yes.
You mentioned that you thought the moose were affected by ticks a couple decades ago, and then the moose came back up again recently.
Yeah, it's a cyclical.
Recovering from that somehow?
It's a cyclical thing. If you have a bad tick year, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have another bad tick year, because if you have a prolonged winter and there's snow on the ground, what happens is those engorged ticks drop off the moose in late winter, early spring. And if there's a lot of snow, they're going to land in the snow and die. If it's an early spring and there's vegetation and leaf litter on the ground, those ticks will live, and you can have another bad infestation the year after that. So it's very weather dependent on how frequent those epizoics happen. Yes?
Can you give us an idea of how many moose are killed by a wolf in a year, for example?
That's a good question. There's a good paper out there that talks about predation rates and kill rates. If you Google Isle Royal predation rate and kill rates, it'll tell you that. I don't have those numbers, so I can't really expand on that. However, one fact I remember is at high wolf density, low moose density, there's almost 90% or better, if I recall correctly, of moose that die are dying from wolf predation. It's an interesting article. I'll have to reread it again, but you can look that one up. Yes, over here.
Do the wolves eat anything else besides moose, and could they survive on the island without moose?
They do eat other things besides moose, especially like in the summer. They feed a lot on beavers. They'll eat snowshoe hare. They'll eat otters. I don't know that they would survive without the moose. I think that they definitely need the larger prey to be able to survive. There was an island, Mishipacoten Island, where they got some of the wolves that they moved to Isle Royal. There was a situation where the wolves didn't have a large prey animal to feed on. They were feeding on snowshoe hare and things, and they were not doing well. So I think they do need that. But there is a diversity in their diet, for sure.
And they'll eat mice even in the summer. There's one species of mouse, the deer mouse, and they'll even eat those in the summer, whatever they can get. Wolves have eaten fish. Yes?
So I went to school in actually Duluth, Minnesota.
Oh,
nice.
Cool.
Yeah, so we can chat about that. But either way, the GPS collars are very new, even from when I came out here. That now have the live tracking. Are there a time limit on those batteries on the GPS trackers, like a 5-year battery or something?
It depends how often you set them to record the data.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make them last a lot longer if you're only collecting points, say every few days or so.
Mm-hmm.
With these, I think they were set to every hour, every 2 hours, and so you're using up the battery a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
I know when we worked in Yellowstone, when we did our winter study with the wolves, we would set them to every half hour because we really wanted to know exactly where those wolves were. As soon as our winter study was over, we reprogrammed them remotely, and they went to collecting like every 6 hours, so you can save the battery. But yes, there is definitely a life on those batteries.
How long did it take them to form packs when they had the introduction from many different areas?
Well, originally there was a lot of conflict between the wolves, and some of the wolves got killed by other wolves pretty quickly when they were put on the island. But that pack that we showed you there, that was 2020. The wolves were put on the island 2018 and 2019. So if they had pups in 2019, it happened pretty quick. And some of the wolves that came over were from the same pack, especially those Mishipacoten wolves. So it may have been a breeding pair from that already knew one another that did. And I'm sure that will be teased out as to which wolves got together in the future when we can look at that DNA analyses.
You said at the beginning that a moose would have no problem swimming 15 miles to get to the island. So I'm just wondering, what would prompt a moose
to need
It's a good question.
It's a very good question.
Who's got an answer?
It's like a moose. I mean, like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really far.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, animals move for different reasons. Young animals disperse from their population looking for breeding opportunities. Could have been something like that. Maybe it was short-sighted and it didn't seem like it was that far going out there. But
Yeah, I
it
don't
seems
know
crazy. But I mean, people see, in Lake Champlain, swimming halfway across, they'll see moose 3.5 miles out in Lake Champlain headed to New York or vice versa. So.
Has this informed any policy for like Anticosti Island in St. Lawrence Bay or other islands that also could hold moose?
Oh, say that again. What about Anacostia?
Has this informed any policy or have there been any interesting studies for similar islands elsewhere based on this?
Oh, that's a good
That's
question.
a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
I wouldn't know that. Are there any predators in Anacostia?
Not that I know of according to Wikipedia 30 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah, just a lot of white-tailed deer out there. We'll look into that, but we're not sure about that.
Yeah.
How do these wolves differ from the wolves out in Yellowstone that you've studied? Are those gray wolves out there?
They're both gray wolves, so there's really no difference except for just regional differences.
And size is the biggest thing.
Size.
The wolves out in Yellowstone are pretty big. I think the heaviest wolf weight out there was over 150 pounds. Midwestern wolves typically might be 105, 120, but I think
Males.
Rolf said there was one that was weighed this last year, might have been 130 pounds. But their weight also determines when they last ate. Wolves can eat 20 pounds of meat at a sitting, so you could have a scrawny wolf eating a lot of food, and if you get him right after a meal, he might seem more. But they're bigger in the West than they are. They eat bigger prey in the West. Some of the packs eat exclusively bison in Yellowstone National Park. Eastern moose is still a big animal, but the bigger animals in the West and up in Alaska are able to take down even bigger animals.
But it's the same species of wolf.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I caught it or not. Do you know what happened to the last pair before they imported the new ones? Did they get absorbed into a pack or get killed off?
Unfortunately, we think they got killed off. So it was the pair, and then we don't know what happened to the female, but we do know that the male was killed by other wolves. His body was found on a trail by a ranger that was walking up on the trail, but he was killed by other wolves. So it was an unfortunate byproduct of that introduction. And when we were down at Daisy Farm the year before, we actually tracked those two wolves, the last two remaining wolves, and went through underbrush and found their beds and found where they were, playing. And so we felt particularly attached to those wolves. But we also knew that it was the right thing to do. So. All the way in the back.
What's the dynamic that we've heard between the eastern timber wolf and the western coyote that has developed the coyote mix that we've found here in New England that's developed what we've called the coy dog, which we've seen here in New England?
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
What
to
would
that.
you say? Lisa used to work for a group that looked into that. What we do know is the coyote bred with wolves from Algonquin area of Ontario, and that's why they're bigger. I don't think, is there evidence that
they've been doing, there's been a lot more DNA studies. First there was just sort of morphological studies, and now there have been a lot more DNA studies, and I really have not followed that very closely, so I can't give you a very educated answer. I know that there are some wolf genes in that population.
And the eastern coyote is definitely bigger than the western
much bigger
coyote.
than the western.
And it is kind of filling the niche of the wolf or the other predators that aren't here anymore. And I know a lot of people don't like the coyotes. I think they're great to have. They're the only large carnivore predator, really. Bears will kill, moose calves and deer fawns, but us people are the only ones that are managing numbers, and we don't do a very good job at managing the right animals. A wolf will take the non-producers out of the population where we're trying to kill that biggest buck out there. So we're actually diluting the population. The animal predators are the ones that are keeping them healthy. So I hope we can embrace that coyote, and we need that predator here.
Yeah, follow-up question.
Yep, go ahead.
It's okay.
Of course.
We owned a farm for quite a number of years in the southern part of the state, and I watched, these animals work their magic across the acreage that we had. And they operated both as wolves and as coyotes, and they were beautiful animals, much larger than their western animals, and they were quite beautiful, but definitely more to the wolf side of the group, and I thought they were quite a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. They have seen that the coyotes on the east are developing more and more sort of wolf, what we would consider wolf behaviors, more in packs and just more pack dynamics and family dynamics than they do out west. The coyotes do out west. So.
But they still hunted as individuals.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
Thank you.
You mentioned 4,000 years of indigenous populations on the island. Are moose and wolves reflected in the archaeological record?
Well, the wolves and the moose weren't there that long. Before they were there, it was a coyote-caribou system. And there was still caribou on the island in the early 1900s. When the moose got there and took over, they kind of outcompeted them. Habitat probably wasn't ideal. There was a lot of commercial stuff going on up until, the 1930s. So caribou, through overhunting too, soon were gone. And then as soon as the wolves got there, they killed all the coyotes. So I'm sure, and I don't know how long those caribou were there, and if there was other ungulates out there before that. And if wolves were ever there before, lynx were on the island at one point. And at the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, maybe even to the mid 1900s, there were lynx out there eating snowshoe hares. There haven't been lynx out there for a while.
And the moose, the whole moose capture, that actually has been done in conjunction with some of the tribes from the mainland in Minnesota. There's a big component of that, of them wanting to have their biologists be part of that as well. So there's an ongoing participation between the sovereign tribes and the island.
Is there still any copper mining going on by the tribes? They collect anything?
Not that we know of. They probably have the right to be doing that, so maybe they are. I'm not sure about that. I think, yeah.
Yeah, there's no sort of real active mines, but it's interesting in the wintertime when we're skiing around, we do come across areas where we can see that there is a very large hole in the ground, and we have to be careful. In the summertime, they have the part where people are walking or hiking, they have the barriers and they stop people from going. But in the winter, with snow, we can pretty much go anywhere, and we definitely have to be careful in some of those areas where there were mines. So we don't want to end up like that poor wolf and his two friends.
I was there with 3 teenagers, and I was
Hold them tight.
trying to keep them away.
You don't,
from there.
yeah, exactly.
It looks like we're kind of wrapping up questions. Is it all right if folks stick around and ask
Sure,
if they want?
for sure.
I know you have specimens and that sort of thing.
Yeah, if you guys have any
Check it out.
questions about any of this stuff. This is a wolf. Lisa, you need to have more data on this wolf.
Yeah, so this wolf was, I forget the year, but I think it was back in the early 1990s, but she was an 80-pound Minnesota wolf that was killed by Wildlife Services, the federal government, U.S. Department of Agriculture, because she had been attacking cows with her pack several times, and so they killed her because she was causing issues. But her pelt has been used for education since then. I've had it for, I think, since 1992, so used it for educational purposes. And then there's some Vermont moose antlers out front too. There's a Yellowstone antler as well. Not actually from the park, but from outside the park, because you're not allowed to collect antlers in the park. There's a moose mandible there, the lower jaw of a moose, and then a wolf skull. So please, hold anything, pick anything up, and please ask more questions or come up and chat with us.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.